55 seconds. That is how long FBI Special Agent Graham Coder and CBI Agent Tammy Lee stared at Chris Watts in complete silence. No questions, no accusations. Just two trained interrogators watching a man realize his entire world was collapsing. Watts had just failed a polygraph examination with a score of -18. For context, -4 indicates deception. He did not just fail, he imploded. And in those 55 seconds of silence, you can watch something break behind his eyes. 36 minutes later, Chris Watts confessed to murdering his pregnant wife, Shanann, and their two daughters, Bella and Celeste, ages 4 and 3. What happened in that room is a masterclass in psychological extraction. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how they did it. Welcome to the Interrogation Files, where power, psychology, and control are decoded, and you learn what they do not want you to know. Today, I am breaking down the Chris Watts interrogation, one of the most documented psychological collapses in modern criminal history. I will show you first the specific techniques investigators used to crack him open. Second, the exact moments where each technique landed. And third, how to recognize when these same methods are being used on you. By the end, you will understand why a man who smiled on national television, asking for his family back, confessed to triple homicide in under 7 hours. August 13th, 2018. Sometime between 2 and 4 in the morning, Chris Watts strangled his pregnant wife Shanann in their bed. What he did not expect was 4-year-old Bella walking in and asking, "Daddy, what is wrong with Mommy?" He loaded both living daughters into his work truck and drove 45 minutes to an Anadarko oil site in rural Colorado. There, he smothered 3-year-old Celeste while Bella watched. Then he killed Bella as she begged, "Daddy, no." He dumped the girls' bodies into crude oil storage tanks and buried Shanann in a shallow grave. By 1:40 that afternoon, Shanann's friend Nicole Atkinson had already called police. Shanann had missed a doctor's appointment. She was not answering texts, and her car was still in the garage. Neighbor Nathan Trinastic handed over surveillance footage that showed only Chris leaving the house that morning, directly contradicting his story that Shanann left with the children. Trinastic told police that same day, he is not acting right. He kept explaining himself over and over. The next morning, Chris Watts gave the interview that sealed his fate. Standing on his porch with news cameras rolling, he smiled while pleading for his family's return. FBI Senior Profiler. Dr. Mary Ellen O'Toole later identified the core problem. That ability to be so very sure of your own interpersonal skills that you can attempt to fool a national and international audience, that is a lot of arrogance and confidence that you could pull this off. Body language expert Susan Constantine was more direct. He does not feel emotion like other people. He is a sociopath, psychopath, narcissistic personality. What Chris Watts did not know was that investigators had already received a call from Anadarko's security manager. They knew about his affair with co-worker Nicole Kessinger. They knew he had motive, and they were about to use everything against him. The interrogation on August 15th lasted approximately 7 hours at the Frederick Police Department. 3 investigators worked in coordination. FBI Special Agent Graham Coder led the interview. CBI Agent Tammy Lee administered the polygraph and handled post-test confrontation. Detective Dave Baumhover of Frederick Police provided support. This was not random, it was architecture. The first phase was rapport-building. Coder's approach was strategic. Agent Lee later described it as a very soft, soothing almost type of voice when he was talking to Chris. But at the same time, he was asking very, very tough questions. This is textbook read technique, the 9-step psychological method that has trained over 500,000 law enforcement professionals since 1974. Build trust, lower defenses, then strike. The polygraph was phase 2. Agent Lee, who finished top of her class in FBI polygraph certification, connected Watts to a Lafayette LX 5000 computerized instrument. She asked 3 questions. Did you physically cause Shanann's disappearance? Are you lying about the last time you saw Shanann? Do you know where Shanann is now? Watts answered no to all 3. His score, -18. Here is what most people do not understand about polygraphs. They are inadmissible as evidence in most courts. The National Academy of Sciences concluded there is little basis for the expectation that a polygraph test could have extremely high accuracy. But that is not the point. The polygraph is a psychological weapon, not a scientific instrument. Practitioners report 80% or higher confession rates following deception-indicated results. The goal is not evidence. The goal is leverage. The goal is to make the suspect believe resistance is mathematically impossible. Agent Lee employed sophisticated pre-test tactics that most people never notice. She asked Watts to list all the ways someone could physically make another person disappear. During this exercise, she deliberately mentioned specific methods. You could smother someone, you could strangle someone. These were not random suggestions. These matched the actual murder methods. Lee was planting psychological anchors, creating mental associations she would exploit during post-test confrontation. Lee delivered the verdict directly. It is completely clear that you were not honest during the testing. And I think you already know that. Then came the 55 seconds of silence. Both agents stared at Watts without speaking. No questions, no accusations, just pressure. This is ratcheting up the pressure. Two agents staring at Watts, Watts rebuffing them, and the clock ticking out the time as the standoff continues. Most people cannot tolerate this kind of silence. The brain screams to fill the void. Watts held out, but that silence fractured something. You can see it in his posture. Phase 3 was strategic evidence revelation. When Watts admitted his affair, hoping to explain away the polygraph failure, investigators revealed they already knew about Kessinger. They had her phone records, her texts, everything. Watch what this does psychologically. Watts thought he was offering information strategically. He thought admitting to the affair would explain his nervous behavior without implicating him in murder. Instead, he learned that investigators had been watching him construct his lie brick by brick. Every denial, every half-truth. They cataloged it all. This is a Reed technique principle called evidence withholding. You never reveal everything you know. You let the suspect think they're getting away with partial truths, then demonstrate you were 3 steps ahead the entire time. The psychological impact is devastating. Suddenly, the suspect cannot calculate what else investigators might know. Every previous statement becomes suspect. Every future lie becomes riskier. District Attorney Michael Rourke described it as a fine line between employing investigative techniques to get the information that you need, while not going so far as to cause the suspect to shut down. Coder and Lee walked that line with surgical precision. Phase 4 was theme development. This is where the psychology gets surgical. Agent Lee explicitly offered Watts a psychological escape route. She suggested Shanann may have killed the children first. Lee later explained, vilifying Shanann, it is a technique that we can use to eventually get the actual truth. We just needed to find Shanann and the girls. This is classic minimization. You do not excuse the crime, you reframe the motive. You give the suspect permission to confess by offering a less revolting version of themselves. At the 6-hour, 42-minute mark, Coder deployed what I call the two Chris's speech. He confronted Watts about being two different people. The good father everyone knew versus someone lying about something else. This technique directly preceded Watts admitting the affair. It works because it forces the suspect to reconcile their public identity with their private actions. The cognitive dissonance becomes unbearable. Phase 5 was the gamble that cracked everything open. At approximately 4:34 in the afternoon, Watts requested to speak with his father Ronnie, who had flown in from North Carolina. This was the highest stakes moment of the entire interrogation. District Attorney Rourke acknowledged the risk. In theory, a father walks into the room and turns into the protective father for his son and tells him, "You need a lawyer?" He lawyers up. This interview is over. Lee made a calculated decision. Chris was not in custody. Chris had every right to walk out of that room at any moment, so we were trying to appease Chris. She let the father in. After 5 minutes alone, investigators listened as Chris Watts whispered his confession to his father. She hurt them. And I freaked out, and I hurt her. They were blue. His father responded, "So she killed both Cece and Bella, choked them to death, and you lost it and choked her?" Watts confirmed. His father said, "Good God Almighty, son, here is where the technique reaches its peak." Ronnie Watts began saying, "Well, you got to get a lawyer, see what we can do." Investigators burst back into the room within 10 seconds. Agent Lee immediately placed her hand on Watts' shoulder, physically breaking the father-son connection. She asked the crucial question, "Will you tell us what you told your dad?" He did. Watch the body language shift throughout the footage. When police first arrived at his home, Watts showed no stress or pain or suffering. He was calm, cooperative, almost eager to help. As hours passed in that interrogation room, visible changes emerged. Body language, expert Constantine identified the cluster of deception. Chris curled his lips in, which was a sign of deep emotional distress, clasped his hands behind his head and was pacing, which taken together can signal deception. This is cognitive load theory in action. Lying requires mental energy. Maintain the story. Track the contradictions. Anticipate the questions. When that energy depletes, the body betrays the mind. Forensic profiler Dale Yeager offered a blunt assessment. He is Scott Peterson, just less charismatic. He has an incredibly large ego. He was very convincing in front of the camera, which means he really comes off as sociopathic. That ego was precisely what investigators exploited. Watts believed in his own likability. He thought he could charm his way through anything. That belief made him stay in the room when a smarter man would have walked out and called a lawyer. Body language expert Dr. Cliff Lansley identified 4 guilt indicators in the porch interview alone. Expression of genuine pleasure when claiming he wanted his family back. Anxiety indicating swaying. A double-handed hand shrug showing no confidence in his statements. And sudden volume drops when discussing details he knew were false. Every micro-expression told the truth his words tried to hide. Detective Baumhover used past tense detection throughout questioning. He flagged Watts referring to his daughters as if they were already gone. Bella was a girly girl. Celeste loved certain shoes. Agent Lee noted, if he is hoping and believing that they are still alive, why would you start talking about them in past tense? The physical manipulation after the confession was equally deliberate. Agent Lee admitted, I could tell Chris was not comfortable with me rubbing his shoulder, but I was okay with that. I wanted him to be uncomfortable, and I wanted him to look at me and to focus back on our questions. Touch disrupts, touch controls, touch claims ownership of the moment. If you ever find yourself across the table from someone using these techniques, here is what to know. First, understand that silence is a weapon. When someone stops talking and stares at you, they are not waiting for an answer. They are applying pressure. You do not have to fill that silence. Second, recognize theme development. If someone offers you a more acceptable version of events, they are not helping you. They are engineering a confession. Third, watch for evidence revelation timing. If someone reveals they know something only after you have committed to a lie, they knew the whole time. They were measuring how far you would go. Fourth, understand that voluntary tests are psychological traps. Watts agreed to the polygraph because he believed he could beat it. That confidence became their greatest leverage when he failed. The Reed technique works. It extracted the location of 3 bodies within hours, but here is the critical caveat. Watts' initial confession was a fabrication. He blamed Shanann for killing the children when he murdered them himself. He did not tell the truth until a prison interview 4 months later, when he admitted that he smothered Celeste while Bella watched, then killed Bella as she pleaded, Daddy, no. Research shows 25 to 29% of DNA exonerations involve false confessions. That number rises to 61% for murder cases. The same techniques that broke Chris Watts have broken innocent people. The machine does not distinguish between the guilty and the vulnerable. Agent Lee reflected on what Watts told her in that prison interview. Chris told us that every night when he closes his eyes, he hears Bella yell, Daddy, no. I feel like it is kind of what he deserves. I hope he hears that every night. Every interrogation is a conversation designed by one side and survived by the other. The question is not whether they will use these techniques on someone. The question is whether you will recognize them when they do. You have been briefed. What you do with this knowledge is your call. If this changed how you see conversations, hit subscribe. Every interrogation follows a playbook. I will decode them all.